Hey guys, today we are doing the 16personalities.com MBTI test, which is one of the most frequently used tests when it comes to working out your personality type. This test involves a series of questions for which you answer strongly agree or strongly disagree with 5 different options and a neutral option as well. Within the MBTI community, it is generally agreed upon that these online tests are not necessarily the best way of working out your personality type. This is because if we take into account the 8 cognitive functions that are behind the MBTI theory, the seed of which was planted by Jung way back in the 1920s, we start to understand that it is actually very hard to work out what cognitive functions you are using in your first and second or dominant and auxiliary slots. If you want more information on the background of that, please click on the links in the description. I will put there some of my own videos in which I explain this in a lot greater detail, as well as videos of some other YouTubers who I think have done a great job in explaining the cognitive functions and the roots of MBTI. From my years of studying typology and thinking about personality theory, it is my opinion that you cannot work out your personality type just by answering questions that a test gives you online. That is because of numerous factors, the first of which is the fact that you are always subconsciously going to be affected by the fact that you know you are being tested. And so factors come into play such as bias of the person you want to be, and that might subconsciously be happening without you even realizing it, or just the way in which you perceive yourself, which is most likely not going to be accurate and the same as how others perceive you. I think the best way to type people is to understand the 8 cognitive functions and to observe people when they are not aware that they're being watched. And so that's why things like typing sessions are good, or observing trends between people in real life. So I'm not going to go too much into that. My aim today is to do the test with you guys and basically talk through it and understand what I mean when I say that our cognitive functions that we are using are actually getting in the way of us being able to take the test in a non-biased way, because the way that we are perceiving each question is determined by our cognitive functions, and therefore how we perceive the question and how we answer it is going to mean that we're starting on a completely separate ground from someone who's using a different perceiving function from us. I'm not saying that these tests are wholly bad in and of themselves. I just think that if you're going to work out your cognitive functions, this method is not necessarily the best way. And I actually think that 16personalities.com, given that there are 5 categories, I've heard the theory that it lines up with the big 5 categories from Jordan Peterson's test, which is a different thing because that's very much behavioral based, whereas Myers-Briggs is not necessarily behavior based. In fact, all 16 types could show the same behavior, but the mental steps that they're taking to get to that behavior are different, which is what differentiates MBTI from other systems. We are looking at how we are perceiving and judging the world, not how we are behaving. So let's jump into it. Okay, the first statement is you regularly make new friends, and I'm to agree or disagree. Now, the first thing I want to point out about this question is the term regularly. We all are going to perceive this question differently based on what we deem as regularly or not. I mean, this statement might be testing whether someone is an extrovert or maybe a feeler. Now, as an extrovert and a feeler, I would answer this question actually disagree, because I don't regularly make friends anymore. I have my good set of friends and I sort of keep them around, and I'm really close and they're my inner circle, so I'm not at a point in my life where I'm looking to expand that too much. If this statement was less vague, it could successfully achieve what it's trying to do. If this question said you regularly talk to new people at a party, then I could answer agree. But in terms of making friends and regularly, even though I am an ESFP, I'm choosing disagree. Now, a lot of introverts are also going to be choosing disagree, so this is naturally going to skew my result already to an introverted result, even though I'm clearly an ESFP. Next question, you spend a lot of free time exploring various random topics that pique your interest. I am going to disagree with this for me personally. I like to hope what they're trying to get at here is extroverted intuition, which is very much a cognitive function that's about diving between multiple different topics, seeing patterns between them, having the fun of exploring them in a chaotic manner. But again, if you're having an NI user who loves to deep dive into topics, they're also going to be choosing agree with this, and this might skew you towards an end result. But I think you could have a TI user, an introverted thinking user, who clicks agree as well, because they like to dabble in, I mean, you could have an ISTP who would like to work out solutions to tangible problems, who would love to dive through various different physical devices or puzzles that they can explore, and they would also choose agree to this question. So again, lots of gray area here. You could get a whole bunch of types choosing agree and disagree for this one. Seeing other people cry can easily make you feel like you want to cry too. Okay, so we're going for empathy here. I assume. This is probably testing extroverted feeling as a cognitive function, which experiences emotions as attached to the tribe rather than separate from the tribe. However, an introverted feeler might choose agree to this because they might perceive this question as thinking about their mother or their father crying, in which case an introverted feeler, if someone very, very close to them starts crying, they could also feel that as well. But the thing is, you might also have some T types who perceive this question as, okay, when I'm watching a movie that tugs at my heartstrings, or I see people crying in a movie, I also want to cry, so I'm going to choose agree. So even so there alone, you've got extroverted feelers, introverted feelers, you've got T users who might cry in response to movies and art who would select agree to this. I'm going to choose agree because as I've grown up as an ESFP, my ability to feel empathy has just increased and I'm a much easier crier than I ever have been, but this might skew me towards an FE result. Not sure. Certainly an F result. I'm an F, makes sense. You often make a backup plan for a backup plan. Okay, obviously I'm gonna disagree with this as an extroverted perceiver, but you would have people looking at this question and thinking, okay, social activities, do I make a backup plan for my social activities? And then you would have other people looking at this in terms of work, like, do I have a backup plan for work? And you might even have, like, when I'm teaching, I do have a backup plan for my lessons if things don't go to plan. So I might choose agree if I perceive this as the work environment. You see what I mean? But I am going to disagree because, generally speaking, I am not inclined to do this. You usually stay calm even under a lot of pressure. Genuinely not sure which letter/cognitive functions they're trying to test here. We all have things in our life that make us get less calm when we feel pressure. This question is quite vague. I don't even know how to answer this. It's not specific enough. Again, because I know what they're trying to do here, I'm gonna zoom out and be like, as an ESFP, I'm generally less likely to panic. So I'll go disagree. That being said, when I get into that tertiary TE and I'm in my stress state, I'm definitely not calm. At social events, you rarely try to introduce yourself to new people and mostly talk to the ones you already know. Fair. This is going to be testing an extroverted perceiving function, I assume. I'm going to go highly agree with this one. That's quite obvious to me. That being said, you could have an introvert who comes along and says, well, I've been trying to be better at introducing myself to new people, and I went to that party 2 weeks ago where I actually did introduce myself to someone new, so I'm going to click agree with this. And the word try, I just realized I should go disagree because it said you rarely try. The word try is what's tricky here because you might have an introvert who is really resolved to be better at this and so they are trying. There needs to be some kind of disclaimer where it's like, at your natural state, get rid of all your New Year's resolutions, all of the goals you've set yourself to change. But even then I doubt that there's going to be an accurate result 100% of the time. You prefer to completely finish one project before starting another. Obviously I disagree as an EP, but again the word prefer is confusing because I could have made like a resolution to be better at this. And in my work setting, I tell myself I have to finish a project before I start another one. So then in the work setting, that means I am actually finishing projects before I start new ones because of the resolve that I have to do that. But my natural tendency as an ESFP is to want to jump from project to project. So my natural tendency would be a strong disagree, but my perception here is getting in the way of me answering completely subjectively because I have a resolution to be better in the workplace with finishing projects, and I'm really good at doing that now, finishing before I start a new one. So I might answer agree, but I will choose disagree because I know my natural tendency is to not finish a project before I start another one. You are very sentimental. This is way not specific enough. We are all perceiving the term sentimental in completely different ways. Sentimental to one person might be perceived as holding on to items that they've had in the past for the sentimental value, and you would have a lot of SI users, even if they are Ts, not Fs, right? Even though we're saying like sentimental, they must be an F, right? You would have a lot of Ts who hold on to past objects. I know ISTJs who do this for the sentimental value. Even though they're not Fs, they're very clearly Ts. Then you would have someone else perceiving this as very superfluous with words of affirmation. You'd have another person perceiving this as being really romantic in romantic relationships, which like everyone kind of is. And then that might disregard how they are in their normal friendships, which is something that should also be taken into consideration. The way we're perceiving this is going to be so different from the person next to us. I don't know how to even answer this. If I perceive sentimental as like writing poetry or crying when I read the Bible or something beautiful in art, then I would click agree. But I also am not the type to hold on to past things. I don't get upset when I delete text messages. I don't need to hold on to past photos. So Like, what does sentimental mean? I'm gonna go with more on the agree side, just purely because I'm an F. But I don't feel great about that. You like to use organizing tools like schedules and lists. Again, I could be an ESFP who comes along and I'm like, well, I'm trying to be better at this, and for the last year I have been better at this, using lists and schedules in the workplace, so I'm gonna go agree. But the truth is, as an ESFP, my natural tendency is not to use schedules and lists. And in my private life, I've tried to use schedules and lists and I absolutely don't succeed in doing that. But I could come along and be like, I'm trying to be better at this, so I'm going to choose agree. Someone might come along and be like, I use a shopping list, I have a calendar in my phone, therefore strongly agree. Whereas others who come along and they've got a list for literally everything, like some ESTJ who's got to-do lists for everything, things they need to complete, things they need to plan, and then they've also got schedules to plan down to every single hour, they might come along and also answer agree. So you've got an ESTJ and maybe an INTP who just use shopping lists, but they're perceiving it as like, I still use lists, so I'm gonna choose agree. Then that INTP might be skewed towards an SI result. Now, I do have a calendar in my phone that I always have to reference because I forget what plan I have next. So I'm gonna only go mildly disagree. Even a small mistake can cause you to doubt your overall abilities and knowledge. Like, what? This is just so vague. I want to say that all people, if they've made a mistake in their work, which is their skill, the thing that they've worked to be really good at, would doubt their abilities and knowledge. I think it's normal in this society to blame yourself when such things happen and to doubt yourself because there are certain expectations on you. I think it's more likely that a self-aware and introspective person who's worked through contradicting those lies that the brain tells us in such moments would be less likely to do this, which could be any type. I can't think of any cognitive functions that I would happily fit into this category, this question. If we were to link this to the Big Five, Jordan Peterson's Big Five, it seems like this is a more conscientious trait, but it doesn't necessarily point to any of the cognitive functions or any of the letters in Myers-Briggs. As an ESFP, if I make a mistake in an area that I know I'm supposed to be good at, I will doubt myself. But if I make a mistake in other areas of my life, I don't really doubt myself and I'll just kind of move on. So I'm gonna go mildly agree on this one. You feel comfortable just walking up to someone you find interesting and striking up a conversation. Okay, that's a huge agree from me. I can't spin that any other way. But again, I'm perceiving this within a party setting. There could be another ESFP who considers themselves more introverted and are just less likely because of other reasons, or maybe other wounds or their upbringing, or where they've come from, that make them more cautious when doing things like this. Doesn't mean they're not an ESFP. I think I'm just quite a meme when it comes to this. You are not too interested in discussing various interpretations and analyses of creative works. Yeah, see, I know they're trying to do an N test here. This is an answer that will likely skew you towards an N result. Problem is, I as an ESFP absolutely love doing this because I am an English teacher and I love reading academic essays about interpretations of various poems that I'm studying with my students, or novels or whatever, and I really enjoy doing that with them. I also enjoy reading different interpretations on the cognitive functions and psychology and all that. So when I'm really interested in something, I will love to do this deep dive, and that's because I do use NI, introverted intuition. It's just lower in my stack, but as I've got older, I've really started to integrate it into my personality with the other three functions and have a more healthy balance with it. So I'm gonna go agree, which is going to skew me probably towards a more N result. So you see how much nuance there is here, and how our own personal brand of nurture and our experiences in life and our empirical data is always affecting our perception of these questions. You're more inclined to follow your head than your heart. Oh goodness. Okay, as a relatively self-aware ESFP who knows the functions quite well and what they're trying to test here and my natural tendencies, I know that I do follow my heart more than my head, but it just takes someone to be either in denial about this, or wishing that they, didn't do this, or thinking of certain circumstances where they did logically reach a conclusion over their emotions and they were really proud of that, or thinking of a few different situations where they did that, and then they will answer agree, potentially ignoring all of the other times where the data proved that they have a natural tendency to follow their heart. So again, perception gets in the way here. I know that I'm more likely to follow my heart. So I'm gonna go disagree. You usually prefer just doing what you feel like at any given moment instead of planning a particular daily routine. This is 100% me. I do prefer to follow the whims of my FI, like all the time, and daily routines do not make me feel joy whatsoever. I think you'd likely have an SI user who would choose disagree here, and I think EFPs would choose agree here. Ps in general would probably skew more to agree as well. But then you've got your, NI users who don't use SI and don't value the repetition of routine. They just value investing their time and energy in a task or activity that is going to contribute towards an end goal of some description or a future-based ideal that they have, future-based goal. So their day could look dramatically different from the next. So I think mostly SI users are going to disagree with this, but I think what they're trying to do here is work out the J versus P difference, because Js are really organized and Ps are not organized, right? But it's just sad because it misses the truth, which is that even though INTJs and ENTJs are Js, they absolutely don't need their day to look the same every day. And in fact, they sometimes loathe to follow routines when their NI is telling them to do something else. They're not going to get that same energy and joy from fulfilling the daily routine as an SI would. You rarely worry about whether you make a good impression on people you meet. Maybe this is trying to test FE, I'm not sure, but again, it just takes someone who has an insecurity with that, no matter what type they are, to answer disagree here. I wish we could all answer based on the natural tendencies of our types, but there are always things that are informing us about our upbringing and our past experiences that inform how we're going to answer these questions. As an ESFP, I will answer agree because I'm usually quite confident in the first impression that I make on people, and I don't particularly mind if we don't get along, like if there's not that immediate click. You enjoy participating in group activities? Absolutely. Okay, so obviously this is an introvert-extrovert question, but again, it just takes a introvert coming along and perceiving this question as a group activity to them being just a small gathering with their nearest and dearest friends playing board games, or a group activity of playing Dungeons and Dragons with people, and they will also answer agree. See what I mean? So whether you have an EP type who's coming along and perceiving group activities as like a large group of people, or introverts who perceive it as a small group of people, both those groups like that group activity, so they are going to answer agree and are both going to skew towards an extrovert result. You like books and movies that make you come up with your own interpretation of the ending? I do, and as an ESFP, that is not a standard response, but again, just because of how I've grown up and my interest in like literature and movies and imagination, I would like to answer agree on this. However, as an ESFP, I know what they're getting at, and my natural tendency most of the time would be to have stories told completely for me so that I don't have to do the work to come up with it. So I'm going to answer disagree, but it would just take someone coming along and not being able to make that switch in their mind and to be like, oh no, I do appreciate coming up with my own answers and interpretations sometimes, to answer agree and skew towards probably an end result with this question. Your happiness comes more from helping others accomplish things than your own accomplishments. As an FI user, my natural tendency is to disagree with this. However, as a Christian, I am going to answer agree. But again, that's not the natural tendency of my personality, so that's going to skew me probably towards an FE result. Even though I use FI, my FI values are very much associated with Christianity, so I cannot detach my FI values from this quiz. I'm going to be answering questions based on how my FI value of Christianity is going to make me perceive these questions. So I'm going to be answering agree, and I'm probably going to be skewing towards an FE result. You are interested in so many things that you find it difficult to choose what to try next. Gonna disagree here, and pretty happily so, as an ESFP. You are prone to worrying that things will take a turn for the worse. See, I don't know what cognitive function they are trying to test here. It could be, if we're talking about the letters J or P, it could be, needing to have things exactly planned out, and how if they don't go to plan, then you get a little bit rattled. But of course, it misses all the nuance of, as an ESFP, I absolutely do worry that things will take a turn for the worse when I don't have any SE data informing my baby and I patterns that I'm creating about how things are going to go. So if I have a lot of SE data, I'm able to very accurately assume how things are going to go. If it's something that I have no data for, my baby and I, which is very archetypal and unnuanced, is going to assume that it's going to turn out for the worse in most cases. So even though I'm a P, this question very much applies to me. I am prone to worrying about that. However, I'm talking about things that I don't have data for. So what about the things that I do have data for? Which, to be honest, at this stage in my life is a lot more than it used to be when I was in my 20s. So that means that I'm less prone to worrying about things taking turn for the worse these days, especially in my day-to-day life where I'm encountering lots of things with which I'm familiar and not very worried about. Then you've got the added factor of me being an EP as an extroverted perceiver who just, everything's a blank canvas and anything can happen, literally anything can happen, and it won't necessarily rattle us. I'm also prone to answer disagree here because I'm an EP. But again, all it would take for me to answer agree to this is to think about, as an ESFP, those times when I have got worried and assumed that the worst case scenario will happen, which is because of my baby and I, not because I'm a J. And then I would answer agree and skew towards a J result. You avoid leadership roles in group settings. Depends. If I'm really comfortable with something, I will happily assume a leadership role. If not, I won't, and I'll be happy not to. And then there's the fact that I also sometimes naturally assume the leadership role without even trying. I honestly don't even know how to answer this. There's so many things that would affect my answer here, though I accidentally answered second to disagree already. I'm gonna say, because I'm an ESFP, I generally tend to avoid the leadership role because I like to more go with the flow. You are definitely not an artistic type of person. See, again, what is art? How are we defining art? Do we like looking at art, or is it talking about creating art? Because you would have all types under the sun who would be able to say that they appreciate art in some way. Whether it's being like, oh, yes, I'm artistic because I create art like every single day. I literally am making things with my hands or painting or making music, whatever it is. Or you'd have some other type who's like, I can appreciate art. That must mean I have a streak of artisticness within me. Sure, I will disagree on this. And then you'd have people of like all types who are not prone to art who would answer agree. And then you'd have people who have particular wounds with art in the sense that maybe they weren't encouraged in it growing up, and then they would answer agree, even if they are prone to art, but you know, their own wounds are getting in the way of acknowledging that. Or maybe they were part of a particularly artistic family where they happen to be the least artistic of everyone, but they were actually really artistic, and they would also answer agree. So nurture, nuance, circumstances all inform these types of things. I'm going to disagree with this one because I'm all about art. You think the world would be a better place if people relied more on rationality and less on their feelings? As an F, I know I should answer disagree here. Like, you know, you do you, whatever your truth is. In fact, as an F and an EP, I would even be more prone to doing that because it's all about, you know, whatever you feel like, you do you know, whatever your truth is. But because of other factors, maybe because I have a lot of T's in my family, or maybe it's because of my Christianity. In fact, it probably is because I do believe in my Christianity that there is one absolute truth. I am prone to answer agree. And then I'm going to probably skew towards a T result. Gosh, I have no idea what my result for this test is going to be. Don't get me wrong, there is obviously a place for feelings in the world, and I think we all need to acknowledge that and create a space for them to exist. But I do think the world would be a better place if we relied on rationality, in the sense that there would be more solid pillars, benchmarks, definitions in terms of things like morality and free will and ethics and philosophy and other things like that, that, you know, if we all agree on those sorts of things, it would be a better place to live in. And I do think that we have hardly any control of so many things in this world. So to just rely on your feelings, and I say this as a well-informed person who for a lot of her life relied just on her feelings, you know, feelings can sometimes be deceptive and they can sometimes cause us to make mistakes, and we know that they pass. But logical consistency and rationality in terms of things that we can all agree on as universal principles, that stuff doesn't pass. You prefer to do your chores before allowing yourself to relax. Okay, depends on the day. Like, it really depends on the day. Like, as an EP, I know I have to do chores sometimes, but I'll decide just not to, and I'll relax anyway. So I could answer disagree here. And that's, by the way, when I'm relying on my feelings to govern my decisions for the day. But then if I'm having a really productive, good day, I will prefer to do my chores first. So again, perception getting in the way of me answering this in a way that's going to give an accurate representation of my type. In fact, I have to answer agree with this because I love these days to start my day with the, washing or laundry or errands just to make myself feel productive. You enjoy watching people argue. See, as an ESFP in my younger years, I didn't like watching people argue because it was like uncomfortable for me. So that's FI, but FE would not like people watching people argue because they're uncomfortable for the room, the tribe, the atmosphere. But I frequently will Google YouTube debates about topics that I'm interested in because I like to hear the perspective of both sides. So I love watching people argue in that sense. So I'm going to click agree for this one, even though I know it's skewing away from an ESFP result when I answer this. You tend to avoid drawing attention to yourself. As I've grown up, I definitely would agree that I avoid drawing attention to myself. I'm tempted to answer that right now. But as an ESFP naturally, and when I kind of don't have any reserve, I do tend to draw attention to myself. So I'm gonna have to go with disagree on this one. And again, as ESFPs, it's not that we want to draw attention to ourselves. It's just that it naturally tends to happen because we are so loud in social settings and we like to perform and entertain people. That was a generalization, but you get me. Your mood can change very quickly. As an FI, absolutely. When I was in my early 20s, I would have answered agree. Well, actually, when I was in my early 20s, I was in denial about this, so I probably wouldn't have answered agree. But if I was answering for my early 20s self, I would answer agree. But as I've grown older and become more emotionally aware and emotionally stable and worked out how to regulate my emotions in a better way, I have to disagree now. But if I choose disagree, I am probably going to be skewed away again from the ESFP result because this question is almost certainly testing FI. You lose patience with people who are not as efficient as you. I know they're testing TE here as a cognitive function, but as a tertiary TE user, I do lose patience with people who are not as efficient as me. Again, I've tried to be better at this, so there's a few different things that could influence my answer here. My desire to be better, being in denial about the fact that I'm even like this in the first place. Those days when I'm just being an EP and I don't even care about efficiency and don't have tasks to do, in which case I don't mind who's more or less efficient than me. And then the days when I'm trying to do things and then someone's not as efficient and then I will get annoyed or angry at them. And I'll try not to take it out on them, but I can't deny that that's a thing that happens. And I'll sometimes even try and take over the task to do it faster than them. I'm gonna say mildly agree with this one. You often end up doing things at the last possible moment. As an EP, I have a tendency naturally to do things at the last possible moment, but as I've grown older, this is something I don't do anymore because I've learned, and I learned that I get stressed out, and I'm only talking about work here, by the way. I learned that I get stressed out if I don't do this. So again, my perception here is in a work sense, I absolutely don't do things at the last minute. So then I would click disagree. But as an ESFP, my tendency naturally is to save things for the last minute. And in areas outside of work, I absolutely do this. So it would just take me coming along and being like, oh, I've got better about this, and being really proud of myself, the fact that I've got better, to answer disagree. But again, because I know the test, because I know myself, because I know MBTI, I'm going to answer strongly agree, because if I'm real with myself, this is still something I have a tendency to do. You have always been fascinated by the question of what, if anything, happens after death. As an ESFP, sensors in general wouldn't tend to contemplate these things deeply. Huge generalization, I know, but I'm just saying that's what I think this question is trying to get at. But again, as a Christian, I literally contemplate this every single day, and I try to have this at the back of my mind or the front of my mind every single day because it so deeply informs my actions and how I live my life. So I want to go agree. But one could argue that it's my FI value that is attached to the idea of God and heaven. So it is that which makes me contemplate the afterlife rather than this fascination of what could possibly be in the afterlife, all the possibilities, right? Which if that's what this question is trying to test, then it could be testing NE. But again, my perception as a Christian is going to make me click agree, which could skew me towards an ENP result. Let's see. You usually prefer to be around others rather than on your own. Well, we know that this is testing the introvert-extrovert axis. I'm going to answer strongly agree because I do need to be around others. More often than not, I usually will go edit at a cafe because I lose my energy when I'm in the house. That being said, I could also perceive this as, well, I'm much more introverted than I used to be back in the day, so I'm going to disagree with this. And again, that's just a testament to the bias that we have in answering these questions. If I'm quite attached to the idea of being more introverted because maybe I associated subconsciously with being more mature or something, so I want to be perceived as introverted, I could skew towards the disagree because I'm remembering the times when I was more introverted over the times when I am clearly naturally more extroverted. But because I'm not particularly attached to the idea of being an introvert at all, and thank you MBTI for helping me to love my extroversion, I'm going to answer agree because it's quite clear that I like to be around other people. There's a lot of nuance to this question though, because as an SE user, I don't rely on other people with my extroverted function. I rely on sense data, so I can get a lot of energy from things even if I do them alone. But that's a whole other bit of nuance there. You become bored or lose interest when the discussion gets highly theoretical. There was a time when I would have answered disagree when I was in the midst of my theology degree, but I'm going to answer agree now just because the data of my life has proved way too many times that I fall asleep or lose interest when I'm amongst philosophical conversations. You find it easy to empathize with a person whose experiences are very different from yours. I must say I agree with this. But I wasn't always like this. I think it's my life experience that has made me this way. I'm sure you can work out what I'm trying. I don't want to keep, I'm not going to keep repeating myself, but you can see the issues there with perception. You usually postpone finalizing decisions for as long as possible. I feel like this is testing lack of commitment or something, like some weird thing that's separate from type. I can't think of a cognitive function that this would be skewing towards. With work, I don't postpone making decisions, but in my personal life, I do tend to postpone finalizing decisions. At the same time, I've gotten much better at, I have no issue with making a plan 2 months in advance. So I'm going to actually disagree with this quite strongly. But I'm probably going to skew away from an EP result as I do it. You rarely second guess the choices that you have made. This is true. I usually am pretty confident with the decision I've made, or if I've made it, I'm like, that's in the past, it's already done, there's nothing I can do about it. I think because of my FI, I'm usually quite sure how I feel about a decision before I've made it and after I've made it, and I've gotten much better at not making impulsive decisions, so I'm gonna go strongly agree here. But again, it just takes someone to come along and perceive this as oh, that one particular choice that I second guessed means that I'm more likely to second guess choices. You know what I mean? After a long and exhausting week, a lively social event is just what you need. Obviously, I'm going to agree here as an ESFP. That being said, there have been times where I really do just want to stay in. If I have my mindset, especially on a book I'm going to read that night or something, I will choose to stay in, or with my housemates, if I haven't caught up with them, I'll choose to stay in. So I might perceive it with that lens and then answer disagree. Again, perception, but I'm going to answer agree. You enjoy going to art museums. This is the classic one that I use as an example of what perception can do in changing an answer to this question. So obviously this question is trying to skew people towards an N or an S result. That being said, if some types think of an art museum, they picture themselves alone in a museum, looking at each piece of artwork, going in depth in their brain about analysis of colors and shapes. To other types, they will have someone with them as they do that so that they can externalize those things, maybe to an ENP. The first type might be an introvert. But then as an ESFP, I love going to art museums, but when I read this question, I perceive it as I'm at an art museum, I'm with a group of friends, I've got a coffee in my hand, we're laughing and enjoying all the colors and shapes. I'm just enjoying the fact that there's a new painting to look at every 5 seconds. So we all enjoy going to art museums for different reasons. So I'm gonna agree with this because as an ESFP, I like doing anything as long as I'm with friends or it's novel or exciting. So I'm gonna go agree. It's probably gonna skew me towards an end result. You see my qualms here. You often have a hard time understanding other people's feelings. Disagree. But thanks to my tertiary TE, when I was in my early 20s, I absolutely struggled to understand people's feelings more frequently. This has come with maturity and going through my own suffering and my own pain in my life. And when you go through pain and suffering, it increases your ability to empathize with others who go through those things. Also, my pool of experiences has just increased. So I'm able to understand people better because I've got experience in lots of different areas now. So if I was 21, I would have answered differently to how I'm going to answer at 29, even though I'm an ESFP, obviously at both ages, but I'm going to skew towards a different result now than I would have at 21. You like to have a to-do list for each day. Disagree fundamentally, but at work, I do like to have a to-do list of what I'm going to do that day, so I can perceive that either way. You rarely feel insecure. At a foundation, my natural personality, I'm going to agree with this statement. That being said, as I've grown up and started to work through my wounds and my own psychological barriers, I have felt much more insecure as I've had to work through some of those things. So it would just depend at what stage of my life I'm taking this test, and it would get me a different result here. You avoid making phone calls. As an ESFP, I should click disagree, right? But I don't love phone calls. I'm by no means on the phone to my friends all the time. I am not that kind of stereotype of an ESFP, so that's going to affect perception right there. Oh, I forgot to answer. Oh, I missed one. Oh well. In your social circle, you are often the one who contacts your friends and initiates activities. Disagree. As an EP, this doesn't happen. In my social group, it's the two FE users, the ENFJ and the ESFJ, who are always doing this. So this is probably testing an extroverted judging function. That being said, I totally do it when I'm really invested in a particular activity or want to make something happen. I'm totally capable of activating that tertiary TE and making it happen. So again, that would affect perception here. If your plans are interrupted, your top priority is to get back on track as soon as possible. Again, with work, it's different from social life. I'm pretty confident disagreeing with this. As an ESFP, you are still bothered by mistakes that you made a long time ago. This is not a cognitive function question. This is a question about being human. If we have done things in our lives that we deeply regret, or we saw that the outcome wasn't, please ignore the fly, ideal, or it's affected our lives in a negative way, of course we're going to be bothered by that mistake that we made. And as we grow up and we, go to therapy or are more real about who we are going to be more prone to worrying about that mistake that we made and facing it right in the face and asking, why is it that I did that? What point was I at in my life and my self-esteem that made me do that thing? Why did I not have any guides around me? What tools was I using to approach that situation? You could be facing those things as you grow older and deal with regrets that you have in the past. And then there are people who won't go through that at all. It just depends on your life experience and what you've been through. This question, I don't even understand what it could possibly be testing. Maybe SI, but that feels just like a generalization to me. To me, being bothered by mistakes that you made a long time ago goes away with healing and processing, not with a different cognitive function. You rarely contemplate the reasons for human existence or the meaning of life. As an ESFP, not prone to doing this. As a Christian, very prone to doing this. I'm thinking about this so often, but as a younger lass, I did not think about this very much at all. So that's affecting perception there. Your emotions control you more than you control them. Control is a tricky one. I get what they're getting at. I would have to answer agree here purely because when I feel an emotion, it does take over my entire existence, my entire world for the moment. But at the same time, I do not let them control me anymore. There was a time in my life where I did. Now I make sure that I do not. If I feel an emotion, I have the right tools for processing it, and I make sure that it's not affecting my actions too much or hurting people or making me make rash decisions. So even though I feel my feelings very strongly, I have a much better control on them now, or coping mechanisms for them now, regulations of them now. So I'm going to, for the sake of argument, disagree with this. And I know that I've improved very much in this area, but do you see what I mean? It's the issue of the word control that has made me change my answer here. If this question was phrased as something like, you feel your emotions quickly, or your emotions take over your world when you feel them, or you tend to experience the emotion before the rationality, or something like that, it'd be clearer. But because of the word control, it's affecting my perception. You take great care not to make people look bad, even when it is completely their fault. See, this implies that the opposite of this would be with the intention of making them look bad. Whereas a lot of types away from which this question would skew, like your T types, they do correct other people's flaws or mistakes or faults, but it's not with the intention to make the person look bad, it's to correct the mistake or the fault, right? As opposed to your FEs, who might not correct a fault because it's at the expense of harmony. They value the harmony more than correcting the fault. So the phrasing of this question is hard because even T types would have to click agree, because when they are making others look bad, it's not with the intention to make them look bad. So they perceive this question as, oh, well, of course I take care not to make people look bad. Of course, you'd have people who are also just perceiving this as, oh, well, if it's completely their fault, then yeah, I'm not going to particularly pay attention to if it makes them look bad. So they would click disagree. But there's a whole bunch of weird gray area here. Your personal work style is closer to spontaneous bursts of energy than organized and consistent efforts. Absolutely. I think this is one of the better phrased questions. Not as much gray area because they've specifically referred to work style. This is a work-life question rather than personal life, which immediately tells us all, okay, we're narrowing this question to how it presents in work specifically. When someone thinks highly of you, you wonder how long it would take them to feel disappointed in you. Doesn't feel like a cognitive function question. Again, it feels like an insecurity question or a self-confidence question, self-esteem question. So, bunch of things that could affect people's perceptions here. You would love a job that requires you to work alone most of the time. Okay. Disagree. I have a job that requires me to work alone most of the time. Thankfully, I still have my tutoring job, so I do get to work with people still. Can confirm working alone is not for the ESFP, specifically not my particular brand of ESFP. So I am going to disagree with this. You believe that pondering abstract philosophical questions is a waste of time. Now, even though I am not prone to pondering them myself extensively, I definitely do not think they are a waste of time, because there is a place for that in the world, as I was saying earlier with the absolute truth question. So I'm going to go disagree, which is going to skew me towards an end result. You feel more drawn to places with busy, bustling atmosphere than quiet, intimate places. Obviously, this is an SE testing question, so I'm going to go agree, because that is an extrovert senses nightmare, to be alone in a place where there is nothing going on and it's the same environment all day, every day. Can we talk about this fly? Are you right, mate? I hope that this is testing extroverted sensing and not just E versus I, because there are so many extroverts, especially like ENFPs and ENTPs, I think, who would much prefer a quiet environment to a busy, bustling, sensorily overwhelming environment. You know at first glance how someone is feeling? Definitely not. But again, with my close friends, I can look at someone and I know exactly what they're feeling. I know where it's probably come from because I know what's going on in their life, and I know how to respond to them in that moment if I know them really well, if I have FI familiarity with them, if they're in my FI heart, right? But this question is obviously testing FE. I mean, again, we don't know if it's testing the functions. Maybe it's just testing F, in which case it's fine. But the problem with this is you have FE users who would be good at recognizing those external signs of empathy in just anyone, who would be answering yes at first glance. I do know how someone is feeling. Agree, right? But then you would have FI users who don't know how someone they don't know is feeling by just looking at them, especially if they're a sensor. I'm not looking past what they're externally showing me. I can only recognize it in my close friends, who would answer disagree. And then maybe this question is meant to skew us towards an F result, because I have a feeling it's not testing the functions. So I'm now going to skew towards more of a T result. You often feel overwhelmed. Okay, this is way too vague. What is often? Okay, this question depends on how people are perceiving the word often, and it depends on how people are perceiving the word overwhelmed. I don't even know how to answer this question because it's not specific enough. I'm going to go with disagree because I generally don't feel overwhelmed. But you'd have all 16 types answering different responses to this, almost certainly. You complete things methodically without skipping over any steps. Oh, disagree. Let's be real, as an EP, I'll skip over as many steps as I can. In fact, is that a TE thing? Probably. You are very intrigued by things labeled as controversial. I mean, for my natural personality would like controversial stuff for the drama, right? But then you have an INTJ who would like the controversial stuff because it sparks an interesting debate. Or you'd have, an ENTP who would love controversial stuff because they get to hear new arguments and new perspectives for seeing things. So again, tricky one. You would pass along a good opportunity if you thought someone else needed it more. My natural personality tends not to do this because of my FI, but because I'm a Christian and I very much believe in loving one another, being charitable to others as like one of my highest values, I'm going to have to vote agree for this, although my natural personality wouldn't necessarily do this. You struggle with deadlines. As an EP, you would think I do, but I've like only been late for things maybe twice in my life. I really value deadlines and I usually am able to make them. But I have a feeling me answering disagree is going to skew me away from an EP result. You feel confident that things will work out for you. Agree. This is such an EFP thing. It's like, oh, I'm doing life based on the whims of my feelings, and even though it doesn't make sense, it's gonna work out for me and it'll be fine. I mean, even through the hardships, things have always I guess worked out for me in the sense that I'm here, I'm happy, I'm healthy, I love who I am today, and my future is a blank slate. So I generally am not a super worried person. I think this is specifically an EFP thing, maybe an IFP thing. But again, it would just take someone coming along who's had a particular upbringing that values certain end goals in one's lifetime, maybe because of culture or whatever, to vote disagree on this, no matter what their personality type is. All right, guys, I'm super keen to see what my result is here. I wouldn't be surprised if I got an N result. Let's see. Yeah, ENFP. There we go. Not the first time I got ENFP with this test. I am 74% extroverted. I used to get 100% extroverted back in the day. Yeah, I take slight issue with the way this is described. This trait determines how we interact with our environment. Yes, the cognitive functions indicate how we interact with our environment. In that, is it abstract ideas and possibilities based? Is it sense data based? Is it functionality based? Or is it relationship dynamics in the tribe based? But introverts aren't first and foremost interacting with the environment whatsoever, if we take environment to mean the external environment, right? So it should say this trait determines whether we interact first and foremost with our external environment or interact first and foremost with our internal environment. But, I haven't created a personality test online that has over 1 million people who have done it. So of course it's easy for me to sit here and critique this thing, but it's just a bit of healthy analysis about how we can better test the cognitive functions or not test the cognitive functions. And yes, this might correlate more with the big 5 categories, in which case it's not really MBTI. Energy, I'm 51% intuitive, 49% observant. This trait shows where we direct our mental energy. Yeah, okay, I can kind of see this in that intuitors are directing their mental energy towards concepts, patterns, the abstract, and sensors are directing their mental energy to any kind of sense data that they collected, and that's their constant reference point, so that's not too bad there. Nature, 41% thinking, 59% feeling. This trait determines how we make decisions and cope with emotions. Okay, yep, makes sense. How we're making decisions and judging. 25% judging, 75% prospecting. This trait reflects our approach to work, planning, and decision making. That's just a little bit too vague there. The PJ letter in the Myers-Briggs Typology Index refers to which of your dominant cognitive functions is your extroverted function. So if you're a P type, you know that your first extroverted function is going to be your perceiving function, so N or S. And if you're a J type, you know that your first extroverted function is going to be your judging function, so F or T. That's how I know as an ESFP, my first extroverted function is going to be my perceiving function, which is the S function, as you can tell from my 4-letter codes. So I know I'm going to have extroverted sensing in my function stack. And therefore with an F in my 4-letter code, I know that it has to be introverted feeling because the first one is extroverted sensing. And because I have an E at the front of my name, we know that I start with an extroverted function. So that's how I know extroverted sensing is first and introverted feeling is second. So the J and P versus the E and I are just a means of decoding in what order your cognitive functions are and which attitude belongs to which function. Attitude meaning is the function extroverted or introverted. I don't know if any of that made sense. If you'd like me to do a video on that, please let me know. Identity. 78% assertive, 22% turbulent. This trait underpins all others, showing how confident we are in our abilities and decisions. functions. I think the reason they have 5 letters is because, again, it correlates to the big 5 categories. This 5th letter doesn't fit into the cognitive functions theory. It's a fun little letter to tack on. It's not a surprise at all to me that I got assertive. But yeah, given that there are only 8 cognitive functions, there's no need for that 5th letter because there are only 2 options of cognitive functions per letter. Okay guys, thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you have more specific questions, please feel free to ask them down below. This community is great, and a lot of this channel's frequent commenters are as well versed, if not more well versed, in MBTI and the cognitive functions than I am. So please go ahead and ask in the comments, and I'm sure someone will jump on and answer you, if not me. If you'd like me to do more videos like this, please let me know. It was a lot of fun. I was in very TE mode as I was doing it. But I do find this stuff so fascinating, and I do think it is good to be able to understand why these kinds of tests are not necessarily the best for working out your cognitive functions. As I've said on the channel before, oh my gosh, this fly. As I've said on the channel before, I do believe that if you do a deep dive into MBTI, or if you do use it at all, it is advisable that you do use it with the cognitive functions in mind, because if you use it for the letters in and of themselves, it can actually do more harm than good, because it really categorizes quite easily people into boxes that actually are not very definable and don't actually make sense, because if you put someone in the N box, you're kind of saying that they're not capable of using a sensing function, whereas the cognitive function theory actually states that we all use a sensing and an intuiting function, just in different orders. So it's about which one are we using first, which one are we preferring, what are our preferences. I use the sensing function as my first preference, but I use an intuiting function as my 4th preference, and so it does play a role there, and it explains why I am able to contemplate abstract things, which I think a lot of people really struggle with when using MBTI, because they're like, oh, how can I just be a sensor and not, like, are you trying to tell me I don't engage with abstract ideas like ever? So there are a lot of problems with that mentality. Obviously, my goal in this video was to just help you to see how different perspectives and different nurture, different experiences can affect our perception of those questions, which then affects what result we're going to skew towards. My result wasn't too inaccurate. I do think that the 16personalities.com test skews towards N results, because a lot of those N questions can be perceived in different ways by S users, like that museum question, for instance, or the idea of philosophy being important. I think you'd have a lot of S users who enjoy going to museums and also think philosophy is important. But anyway, I digress. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys, and I will chat to you soon. Bye!